afternoon. I'm here today with Terry Rankin of XR America. I'm Dale Wolkinen, and this is Brian Wright, and we're both from Facing Future. So Terry, we would love to hear what is the whole structure of XR America and its philosophy.
Well, like all Extinction Rebellion, it's based on the core three demands, which is tell the truth, net zero carbon, and citizens' assemblies. The purpose of which is to clarify for number one, telling the truth and acting as if it's real, which hasn't really caught on yet. The truth is getting out there, but the action on that truth is still lagging way behind where we ought to have been. But still the demand is there. The second one, net zero carbon, is obviously addressing the root cause of the gas chamber we've turned the planet into. And the third one, citizens' assemblies, is it's often thought of as being a third party, but that's not accurate because we are beyond politics with Extinction Rebellion. It's more like how we can come together as the people to govern our governors rather than the government keeping us under their governance. You see what I mean? I mean, in America, we're supposed to be we the people, but we the people have precious little to say about how we're governed these days. So those are the three core demands. Now, the fourth one has XRUS actually came up with the fourth one first, and then XR America came along and they added a fourth one as well. And they tend to be aimed toward more of social justice, hand in glove with climate justice. Mm-hmm. That's what the fourth demand is for, both for XRUS and XR America.
Okay, that brings us to a very interesting question. Why is there a split between the two agencies who both want to respect each other's opinions and include everybody? And numbers, of course, we need to unite in numbers. Can you patch that up with them, or what is happening with that?
That's a good question. The founder of both organizations was Roger Hallam, of course, the UK co-founder of the original XR in the fall of 2018. He founded both groups. The split between them is the result of the failure of XRUS to stick to any demand except the social justice demand. It became the de facto number one demand to such an extent that you couldn't start a chapter without signing in blood that that's what you stood for, and the other demands just kind of faded away.
Well, in the United States, a huge movement started after the death of George Floyd, of course, and the focus shifted, and the radical movements of people in the street were based around that. So, you know, it seemed to me that, you know, this is an incredible opportunity to unite the two movements. I would have to say that, you know, there were the numbers, there were the people in the street. And the issue was Black Lives Matter, of course, but underlying that is, you know, the incredible ecological unfairness of where we put our factories and where we put the pollution. And, you know, you could go on and on about how people of color are disproportionately unfavored by in ecological matters. So I'm a little shocked that this division was created over that when this could have been a fantastic opportunity to gather numbers.
Well, I totally agree with you. And this is why it's such a gnarly Gordian knot kind of thing to disentangle. It isn't that XR America is saying that social justice is irrelevant or doesn't matter, or doesn't have anything to do. No. Not at all. They are every bit as heart, soul, mind, and strength committed to social justice as they are to climate justice. But they see the two as being so, exactly as you suggest, so interconnected that you have to keep your eye on both of those balls, if you will. You know, you have to juggle them both and bring them into a kind of resonant harmony where you're working on both of them despite their differences. That's not the approach that XRUS is taking. The approach that XRUS is taking is they continue to vilify Roger. The XR Global faction is continuing to vilify Roger, and both are equally attacking XR America in social media. I
This
mean,
is
it's,
such a shame, you know, this is.
it is. It absolutely is. And I will say, and I was in XRUS until just over a year ago.
You know, in the history of movements that are supposed to be liberating to the world, including all the left-wing movements of Europe in the last century, what happens is that they split. They split over ideological ideas. What conversations can be undertaken to make that unity between the two and to draw in as many people as possible, because without that, how are we ever going to institute citizens' assemblies or make any real changes in policy?
I totally agree with you, Brian. And it's interesting that you bring that up, the historical perspective, because Roger and 2 or 3 other of us in the Walk with Nick campaign with XR America are currently reading the Freedom Riders book, large tome. It's like 600 pages. It was written about 10 years ago, I think. And it's about that whole Freedom Riders movement in the US that started in Alabama in the late 50s and finally became the bus rides, the 2 bus loads of 12 people each member of whom, by the way, wrote their last will and testament the night before they got on the bus, knowing what kind of battle lines they were marching up against. And that's exactly the spirit that Roger and those of us who are involved in the Walk with Nick at a very instrumental level, that's exactly the kind of spirit we want to bring. We just want to bring it about the climate and social justice issues. Climate justice, social justice, they are so interconnected, especially for people of color, obviously, and especially for the global South, regardless of color. Just because of the economic conditions south of the equator, it doesn't matter what color you are, 99.9% odds are you're starving and the climate is already eating you alive. So yeah, Brian, that dynamic is especially crucial. And the example that's becoming increasingly important to us in XR America is that Freedom Rider movement from the mid 20th century.
So
the other struggle that I struggle with personally is the change in government position, especially in the US. We have a Trump administration who was positively moving against the interests of humanity throughout their administration. And now we have the Biden administration who's made a very strong stand internationally on the issue of climate change and is very much behind perhaps a more conservative route than we would think of in XR and many other activist organizations. But at least they are making all the efforts that they can towards international agreement that will hopefully limit or turn down the speed of climate change somewhat. What's your stand in terms of position against or working with the government?
Personally, or speaking for XRA, or both?
speak for XR.
Well, both.
Speaking for XRA, the stand is we would just wildly rush into a collaborative work with the Biden administration in the US, with other governments around the world. But they don't welcome that much public voice into the conversation. That's why we ask for the citizens' assemblies, because that brings hopefully enough people with a loud enough voice into the dialogue that the Biden administration, for instance, would learn more than they know, or at least than they speak about the science, because they're still talking 2030 for net carbon, and that's at least 5 years too late from the science. So there is room for dialogue there if citizens' assemblies are taken seriously. But it can't be a partisan issue. I mean, that's why we have, as one of the values of the organization, both XRUS and XR America share this: beyond politics. We have to take this out of the political discussion. We have to take it to the truth and reality discussion of we have really turned the planet into a gas chamber. And it doesn't matter what your ideology is. It's going to kill my children. It's going to kill my grandchildren. That's the personal side of it for me. And I don't want to have political conversations about it when my grandchildren's lives are at stake, if you follow me personally. Practically speaking, it's going to require governments who say, yes, you are the ones responsible for government. Tell us how we can execute what it's going to take. There's no escape, there's no exit now, but at best, mitigation is the best possibility for the future. And the governments need to listen to citizens' assemblies and guide them. Citizens' assemblies need to listen to scientists.
Okay, Terry, are there citizens' assemblies functioning in America? Do they exist? And how many are there, if so?
Not to my knowledge. And I confess some ignorance there. I haven't done a lot of research to find out if XRUS has any underway. I doubt seriously that they do. I think they have been spontaneously assembled, but the government pays no attention to us. When we do show up in mass, that we're just protesters that are in the way. So it's not really, they aren't yet taking it seriously. Our third demand isn't even acknowledged. The organization isn't even acknowledged.
Well, in the UK, which is has a slightly different form of government, the citizen assembly idea can sort of come out of the village council, and there are some better opportunities for a citizen assembly. In the United States, we have these separate states, and I could see maybe citizens assembly working on state level, depending which state they're in, because each state has a totally different flavor, as we know. But the citizen assembly idea, goes back to the old Greek idea of what is a real democracy. And when you get so many numbers, you begin to lose the capability to have that sort of ancient democracy that we would all love to have. I wonder, though, if you have approached the Biden administration with any sort of letter or attempt to, put a position there or ask them for something in particular. What has been your approach to them? You say they're not listening to you. What have you done to contact them?
Well, letters, voicemails, senatorial campaigns, during election cycles, all sorts of presentation of our demands take place. So far, the only progress that's been made is what I would call talking the talk, lip service. There are states, there are city councils, there are state and local, I would say, governments that have declared climate emergencies. Miami, Florida declared a climate emergency. The state of Florida has not. And the list goes on. Some cities do, some cities don't, some states do, some states don't. Nothing has been said at the federal level about it in terms of declaring a climate emergency until Biden. Now, Biden has been talking that talk.
Okay, well, let's talk about XR America and its declaring of an emergency and its way of, I know you want to bring people into the streets, you want to have climate actions. You have this fellow Nick who's walked across Florida telling people what's happening.
Students are being sentenced to death, essentially. We're studying for a future that has been stolen from us. Our government has failed to protect us. It has broken the social contract, and we are headed for annihilation. We're currently in the 6th mass extinction event.
There's a lot of fear among young people, and I think we need to deal with them very carefully. I had a discussion with Roger a few months back, actually, Roger Hallam, about that. How are you helping the young people? And we talked about that. How are you going to make it possible for them to act and to live their lives and to, be useful citizens and without them becoming terrified? It's very important.
I don't know. That's a delicate balance to achieve, because on one side you have the tell the truth demand, and then you have the idea of, it sounds to me like you want to make it kind of make that truth palatable, not scary. Make that truth real, but not palpable.
When you're talking to young people, high school students, I'm talking about, when you're talking to the young people, this is not talking truth to power. This is talking truth to people who are just learning that truth. And you have to empower them to act, not frighten them away from acting, or they want to turn away, you know, oh no, I don't want to hear that. Oh, what are you saying? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I didn't know that, you know, is a much better approach.
Well, maybe. It hasn't worked yet. I
I
mean,
think it has worked. Greta Thunberg has gotten Fridays for Future launched. Kids all over the world are, you know, excited, going out and marching for climate on Fridays before the pandemic. And I think they will start again.
And
Thousands and thousands of them all over the world.
Did she not frighten any of those youth?
Her main message was listen to the science. And that's the thing that's come through strongest for as far as I'm concerned. I think that's the thing that's attractive, because if you actually look into the science, you can find these answers. You can find, you can also see the obscurations that people are putting in front of us to keep us from feeling the fear of what's coming. But I think it's really important to present the truth, as you say in one of your main pillars of the organization, is present the truth and not to exaggerate on one side or the other, and not to frighten people because you're frightened. So I don't know, how do you respond to that?
Well, let me ask it this way. Have you noticed the number, rapidly rising number of scientists who are no longer saying that there are good reasons for hope that we will come through this and get back to normal? I mean, they're just nobody in the scientific community is sending that message anymore. That's not the story.
Yeah.
Increasingly, and I've watched over the last 5 or 6 years as the IPCC reports, the NOAA reports, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've watched as those reports have just worsened every year. And especially the IPCC and NASA and NOAA, every year. In other words, the catastrophe we're in is racing so far ahead of us, our science can't keep up. And one of the best examples of that is the methane issue. Last year, the scientific community had to fess up that a prediction they made about methane release 70 years in the future was already coming true. 70 years is a pretty big miss. And their models now, they've got a whole new set of mathematical models for assessing the scientific characteristics of the climate problem. And the better the models get, the worse the predictions get. That's pretty much a general trend.
I totally agree with you, by the way, Terry, that we have to be screaming in the streets about this. This is a serious and terrifying problem that we can't just sit and write letters, certainly not. You know, every time I see a cruise ship going out, I think, why don't we just get out there and you know, scream about it? Why are you using 50 gallons per mile to do this crazy thing with this? You know, this is nonsense. All these luxury things that are polluting our planet, you know, let's be there. You know, like Greenpeace was there for all kinds of operations years ago. You know, yes, we definitely need numbers and we need protests. And I'm, you know, I'm certainly with you on that. I'm glad you're organizing that.
Yeah, to get back to the youth, because I share your concern, believe me. The last thing I want to do is cause any youth to commit suicide out of fear or hopelessness or despair or any of that. That's the last thing I want to have happen. That's why we don't go into middle schools. We don't go into elementary schools, obviously. And the only youth we want to reach are the 14, 15-year-old ninth graders and up to the early adult like Nick and Donald. Well, Donald's in his 30s, Nick's in his 23. So it's that demographic from what the Jews consider, for example, as an age of consent, 12 years old. But we aren't going that young. We're going for the 14 to 15-year-old mindset that is just not quite fully adult yet, but they are thinking for themselves. Mm-hmm. Okay, very much so. And I'll put it this way. My 10-year-old granddaughter, to kind of make it more personal, she's a very bright young child. Of course, I'm biased, but she's a very bright young lady. And her parents, my daughter and son-in-law, don't really, they're millennials, they're creative, self-employed, and they're so heads down, they can't bear to look up at this. It's so cognitively dissonant for what they have to do on a day-to-day basis that they just can't cope. I'm retired. My wife and I, it's just the two of us. I spend 50 or 60 hours a week working this stuff. And the best conversation I've had in recent memory with anyone about this was with my 10-year-old granddaughter. She gets it.
Mm-hmm.
She understands that she's probably not going to live to be 30. And she gets that. She wraps her head and her heart around that.
Mm.
In the context of not expecting to live very much longer for the majority and eventually probably the whole of humanity.
Possibly.
We have to ask ourselves the question, what is the point of setting up something that will only discover that we have very little choice but to completely cut our emissions immediately and find ways of recovering the ecology of the earth immediately, or we're fucked, as has been said many times. So how do we deal with this situation in which XR America is also offering a piece of hope through citizens' assemblies, through protest, through action? How do we square that with the hopelessness of the other part of your message?
That gets to the heart of the matter for me. It truly does. And I think for Roger and all the activists of good faith, and I don't mean Christian faith, I just mean good faith, existentially speaking, philosophically, of good faith and authentic action, for all of us, Jim Bendell, Katie Carr, Deep Adaptation colleagues, XR America, XR US, Greta Thunberg, Fridays for Future, all of us are gradually coming to the inevitable position that we have this moment. Period. We have this moment, not the next one. Because if you look at the bulletin for the atomic scientists, you familiar with them and their doomsday clock?
Yes.
You know the setting? Second year in a row, 100 seconds.
Yeah.
And they're not just kind of making up that number. We're on a 100-second fuse to extinction because of these three factors: weapons of mass destruction, disruptive technologies, and what's the third one? The climate crisis. When they take those three things together, one of the best scientific institutions on the planet for the last 75 years says we're on a 100-second countdown to doom. So do citizens' assemblies matter? Not because they can fix the problem, I submit, but simply because they bring us together in this moment where we have 100 seconds to be together. That is the virtue. That is the value. Making a difference, we don't have time to make a difference that will make a difference. That's the futility of the truth and reality, scientifically speaking, that climate crisis and existential and extinction crisis brings into play here. Futility is where we are.
Well, actually, I believe we do have a few years here. We have a very small and closing window, but we could actually be able to stop this process from becoming totally catastrophic. It's still going to be a catastrophe, but we could mitigate some of the most terrifying effects of it. And there are things certainly about nuclear energy and where nuclear waste is stored, you know, we have to really address that, because we're leaving that as a destruction of the of the earth for the future. Life does have a way of coming back after extinctions, but not after you've poisoned everything with radioactivity for 100,000 years. However, the good news really is that there is this little window of time. And we could actually use this little window of time. And that's what's exciting about it, that you know, we are a generation that has a chance. Not very big chance and not for very long, but it's there. So, you know, galvanizing people to stop playing their video games and get out in the streets and, you know, be upset about it and make other people aware of it is very, very important. What you're doing is very, very important, and it can have an effect. So I don't think you should be completely negative, you know, pessimistic about it. I think there's, you know, there's exciting people about that thrilling possibility that we could still save ourselves.
That we have to understand that our human lives are not just this one life, that we go on after death, that the spirit is the eternal part of us. And together with understanding the present and the possibility of action for the future, we need to understand that our own lives are something that will continue beyond the death of the body and beyond the death of the earth. Maybe a message that is not easy to assimilate for anybody, but I believe that that's the whole of the truth of it. So the only thing that we can do in the present is to take whatever action we can to preserve life and to return the earth to a balanced position, but we can't be attached to the outcome because we don't know what it'll be.
I think that was extremely well said. And Dale, I take your points too. The two realities at work that brought us here and will long outlast us are the causal laws of nature. Okay, natural law, if you call them, they are causal laws. And the lesson we have to learn from this in the moment and for the future is that we are not the gods who created them. We are not the sovereigns over natural laws. Natural laws are absolutely sovereign over us and all of nature everywhere in the cosmos for the last 14 billion years. Okay, Big Bang to Big Crunch, that's the causal teleology of truth and reality, scientifically speaking. So that's one thing that is actually something worth clinging to. Causal laws brought us into being, and I doubt seriously they're going to pass us completely out of being. Okay, so on that point, Brian, I'm entirely in agreement with you. And what is it about us that preserves that being? And the answer is one word: love.
Yes,
we're
indeed.
the only species, or at least the apex species, that is capable of love. And that's something nature cherishes.
Well, I think many species are capable of love, and we've been discovering that. Surprise, much to our surprise, other species have consciousness, they have sensitivity, they have emotions, but that's the subject of another discussion. Yeah. Terry, it's been great to talk with you today. I really appreciate your joining us on Facing Future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you, Dale. I hate for it to end. I would love to continue this conversation if we have another chance.